A soaked old man collapsed at a bus stop, and the only person who stopped to help had no idea who he really was. A billionaire stood beneath crystal chandeliers and pointed at the woman his son loved. In front of 300 wealthy guests, Richard Whitmore delivered an ultimatum that shattered the room. Marry her and you're no longer my son. The crowd watched in silence as Ethan chose love over a billion-dollar future and walked away with Naomi Brooks, a kind-hearted black woman from South Chicago. But just when it seemed they had lost everything, a black SUV rolled through the mansion gates. The man who stepped out knew Naomi's true worth, and within minutes, the billionaire who humiliated her would discover he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. A powerful story about love, dignity, kindness, and the moment karma finally comes calling. The glass mansion glowed like a jewel against the Beverly Hills night. Light spilled from towering windows. Crystal chandeliers shimmered above polished marble floors. Luxury cars lined the circular driveway, while valets hurried through the warm California evening. Inside, 300 guests moved through the ballroom in designer gowns and tailored suits, balancing champagne flutes and conversations worth millions of dollars. Everything about the Whitmore Foundation Gala had been designed to impress, and it had. Until Richard Whitmore pointed his finger. The room fell silent so quickly it felt unnatural. The string quartet stopped in the middle of a note. A waiter froze beside a table of investors. Even the laughter disappeared. Richard Whitmore stood near the center of the ballroom, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, every inch the billionaire who had spent 30 years building an empire. His finger remained aimed directly at Naomi Brooks. "You heard me," he said. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "Marry her, and you're no longer my son." A sharp breath moved through the crowd. People glanced toward Ethan Whitmore, toward Naomi, then quickly looked away. No one wanted to be caught watching. No one wanted to be involved. Ethan stood beside Naomi in a black tuxedo. His jaw tightened. His hand found hers. He squeezed gently. The gesture was small, but Naomi felt it. She needed it, because every eye in the room seemed to be staring at her. The poor girl, the outsider, the woman who supposedly didn't belong. Richard took another step forward. "I warned you," he said to his son. "I warned you exactly what would happen if you brought her here." "Dad." "No." Richard raised a hand. "You don't get to interrupt me tonight." His gaze shifted to Naomi, cold, dismissive, the same look he had given her from the first day they met, the look that said she was less than everyone else in the room. Naomi kept her chin lifted. Inside, her stomach twisted, but she refused to look down. She had spent too many years being underestimated, too many years being judged before people knew her name. She wouldn't give Richard Whitmore the satisfaction. Around them, wealthy guests exchanged nervous glances. A senator near the bar suddenly became fascinated by his phone. A famous real estate developer studied the champagne in his glass. An actress looked toward the exits. 300 people, not one willing to speak. Richard laughed softly. "You see this?" he asked. He gestured around the ballroom. "These are people who built something." His eyes narrowed. People who earned their place. The insult hung in the air. Everyone understood what he meant. Naomi understood too. She felt heat crawl into her cheeks. Not because she was ashamed, because she was angry. Angry that a man who knew absolutely nothing about her life believed he knew everything. Ethan stepped forward. "That's enough." Richard's expression darkened. "No, Ethan, it isn't." Ethan's voice grew stronger. "You don't get to talk about her like that." Richard laughed again. This time there was no humor in it. "You want me to tell the truth?" He turned toward the audience, toward the room, toward the people who would repeat every word tomorrow. The truth is, my son wants to throw away everything for a woman from South Chicago. A few uncomfortable shifts echoed through the ballroom. Richard continued. A woman with no family connections, no social standing, no place in this world. Ethan's grip tightened around Naomi's hand. She could feel his anger, could feel him preparing to fight, but Naomi gently squeezed back. Not yet. She didn't want him losing control, not because of her. Richard noticed. Of course he noticed. Men like Richard noticed everything, especially weakness, especially kindness, and they often confused the two. You think this is love? Richard asked. His voice echoed beneath the chandeliers. This is a mistake. He looked directly at Naomi. A very expensive mistake. The words landed like stones. For a moment, Naomi couldn't hear anything else. Not the music, not the guests, not the clink of glasses. Just those words. A mistake. The funny thing was she had heard versions of them her entire life. From landlords, from former employers, from people who saw her neighborhood before they saw her face, people who decided her worth before she opened her mouth. The ballroom blurred slightly, not from tears, from memory. She remembered eviction notices, hospital waiting rooms, long nights helping her mother through illness, years working jobs nobody wanted, years surviving, years helping others survive too. And somehow she had still managed to remain kind. That was what hurt the most. Not Richard's words. The fact that kindness never seemed to matter to people like him. Richard straightened his jacket. His voice became even colder. I'll make this simple. He looked directly at Ethan. You choose tonight. The room collectively held its breath. You choose her. He pointed toward Naomi. Or you choose this family. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The silence became almost unbearable. Naomi could hear the distant splash of water from the backyard fountains, could hear the air conditioning humming above the ballroom, could hear her own heartbeat. Ethan didn't hesitate, not even for a second. I already chose. The words landed like thunder. Richard stared. Several guests exchanged shocked looks. Ethan stepped closer to Naomi. I chose her a long time ago. A woman near the front gasped quietly. Someone dropped a fork. Richard's face hardened. So that's it? That's it. Richard nodded slowly. A dangerous nod. The kind that came before destruction. Then you're finished. The billionaire's voice remained calm. Far too calm. You lose everything. Ethan never looked away. Richard continued. The trust. Nothing. The company. Nothing. The inheritance, still nothing. The billionaire shook his head, as if he genuinely couldn't understand what he was seeing. How could someone walk away from billions? How could someone choose love over power? How could someone choose Naomi Brooks? The answer was standing right in front of him. But he couldn't see it. Because men like Richard Whitmore only understood value when it came with a price tag. Naomi finally spoke. Her voice was quiet. Steady. Mr. Whitmore. Richard looked at her. She met his gaze. For the first time all night. Fully. Directly. I never wanted your money. The room remained silent. I never wanted your approval. Another pause. I only wanted you to see your son the way I do. Something flickered across Ethan's face. Something emotional. Something real. But Richard simply laughed. A short, cruel laugh. Then you're even more foolish than I thought. The words echoed through the ballroom. Nobody defended her. Nobody objected. 300 witnesses. 300 silent people. Naomi suddenly felt tired. Not broken. Just tired. Tired of proving herself. Tired of fighting battles she never started. Tired of standing in rooms where kindness counted for nothing. She turned toward Ethan. We should go. For a moment he hesitated. Then he nodded. Together they started walking toward the exit. No dramatic speech. No argument. Just two people leaving, hand in hand. The crowd parted automatically, like water around a stone. No one stopped them. No one wished them luck. No one said a word. Their footsteps echoed against the marble floor. 1, 2, 3. Each step carrying them farther from the world Richard Whitmore controlled. They were almost at the doors when a strange sound interrupted the silence. Headlights swept across the ballroom windows. Several guests turned. A valet near the entrance suddenly straightened. Outside, a black SUV rolled slowly through the front gates. Not flashy, not expensive looking, just powerful, deliberate. The vehicle moved up the circular driveway and stopped directly in front of the mansion. Its engine went quiet. Inside the ballroom, conversations died again before they could begin. Something about the arrival felt important. Different. Richard frowned. He glanced toward the windows. The SUV door opened. A tall figure stepped out. The porch lights illuminated only part of the man's face, just enough to reveal silver hair, a dark suit, and a presence that made even the valets stand a little straighter. Naomi stopped walking. For reasons she couldn't explain, her heart suddenly began to race. The stranger looked toward the mansion, toward the ballroom, toward the people inside. Then he started walking toward the entrance, slowly, purposefully, as if he already knew exactly why he had come. And inside the Whitmore mansion, not a single person realized that the night was about to change forever. But 6 hours earlier, on the opposite side of the country, nobody would have guessed Naomi Brooks would end up standing in the center of a billionaire's nightmare. The sun had barely begun to set over South Chicago. Orange light stretched across rows of aging brick buildings. Storefront signs buzzed with tired neon. A city bus groaned to a stop beside a cracked sidewalk, while a train rattled overhead on steel tracks that had carried generations of workers home. Naomi Brooks stood behind a serving counter inside the Hope Street Community Kitchen. The room smelled like chicken soup, fresh bread, and strong coffee. A line of people stretched nearly to the door. Single mothers, retirees, construction workers between jobs, veterans, teenagers who pretended they weren't hungry. Naomi greeted every single one by name. "Evening, Mr. Jenkins. How's your knee today, Rosa? Hey, Marcus, save room for dessert." People smiled when they saw her, not because she was important, because she cared. The kind of caring that couldn't be faked. The kind that showed up every day, whether anyone noticed or not. An elderly man shuffled toward the counter using a walker. Before he could ask, Naomi placed an extra bread roll on his tray. He laughed. "You always know. You always ask for one anyway." The old man grinned. "That's because I like hearing yes." Laughter spread around the room. Small moments, simple moments. They were the pieces of life Naomi loved most. Across the kitchen, 12-year-old Isaiah struggled to carry a heavy box of canned goods. Naomi immediately walked over. "Easy there. I got it." "No, you don't." The boy smiled sheepishly. Together they carried the box to the storage room. When they returned, Isaiah hesitated. "Miss Naomi?" "Yeah?" "My mom got the job." Naomi's face lit up. "The hospital job?" He nodded. We start moving next month. Without thinking, Naomi wrapped him in a hug. That's amazing. The boy's eyes watered. Nobody noticed except Naomi. She understood. Some victories looked small from the outside, but for families like theirs, they changed everything. The dinner rush continued until nearly 8 o'clock. By then, most volunteers had gone home. They always did. Not because they were lazy, because they had families waiting, lives waiting, responsibilities waiting. Naomi stayed. She always stayed. The dining room gradually emptied. She stacked chairs, wiped tables, packaged leftovers. Outside, evening settled over the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered on one by one. A police siren echoed somewhere in the distance. The city never truly became quiet. Not here. Not in neighborhoods where people worked too hard and slept too little. As Naomi tied up a trash bag, her friend Denise appeared from the office. You know you're allowed to leave sometimes. Naomi smiled. I am leaving. You've been saying that for 40 minutes. Denise leaned against the doorway. When was the last time you had a day off? Naomi laughed. I don't remember. Exactly. Denise folded her arms. You spend all your time taking care of everybody else. Somebody has to. You ever think maybe somebody should take care of you? The question lingered. Naomi looked away, toward the front windows, toward the fading daylight. Truthfully, she didn't know how to answer. Most of her life had been spent taking care of people. Her mother, her younger brother, neighbors, friends, strangers, anybody who needed help. Long before she learned what kindness was, necessity had taught her responsibility. Her mother had worked 2 jobs, then illness arrived. Slowly at first, then all at once. Hospital visits, medical bills, missed paychecks. Eventually, the apartment disappeared. The furniture disappeared. The stability disappeared. Naomi had been 21 years old when she became the adult in the family. Her brother was 14, scared, angry, lost. She remembered nights when they shared one space heater because they couldn't afford 2. She remembered skipping meals so he could eat. She remembered pretending everything would be okay, even when she wasn't sure it would. Those years left scars nobody could see. Not dramatic scars, quiet ones. The kind that taught you never to waste food, never to throw away a coat, never to ignore somebody else's pain, because you remembered exactly how it felt. You disappeared again, Denise said. Naomi blinked. What? That look, what look? The one where you're reliving 20 years of trauma. Naomi laughed. A real laugh. One that filled the room. I'm fine. Denise didn't believe her. Nobody who knew Naomi well ever believed her when she said she was fine. Because Naomi's definition of fine was very different from everyone else's. Her phone buzzed. A message appeared. Ethan. Just seeing his name made her smile. Dinner tonight? A second text arrived. I found a burger place you haven't judged yet. Naomi laughed again, then typed back. Impossible. I've judged all burger places. 3 dots appeared. Challenge accepted. She slipped the phone into her pocket. Denise immediately noticed. There it is. There what is? That smile. Naomi rolled her eyes. Stop. Nope. Denise grinned. That's the Ethan smile. Heat touched Naomi's cheeks. She hated how obvious it was. But maybe that was what love did. Maybe love made it impossible to hide joy. The front door opened. Cold air drifted inside. A woman entered carrying a toddler. Naomi instantly recognized her. Tanya, single mother, 2 jobs, 3 children, permanent exhaustion. Naomi walked over. Everything okay? Tanya looked embarrassed. I know dinner service is over. Sit down. I didn't want to bother anybody. Sit. The woman obeyed. 10 minutes later, a hot meal sat in front of her. Her toddler laughed while eating mashed potatoes. Tanya looked close to tears. Thank you. Naomi shrugged. It's just dinner. No. Tanya shook her head. It's not. The words settled heavily between them, because both women understood. Sometimes food wasn't just food. Sometimes kindness wasn't just kindness. Sometimes it arrived on the exact day someone needed proof the world still contained good people. Later that night, after locking the kitchen doors, Naomi stepped outside. The city air felt cool against her skin. Traffic lights reflected off damp pavement. Somewhere nearby, music drifted from an apartment window. Life continued all around her. Messy, complicated, beautiful. Her car sat beneath a flickering street lamp. The paint was fading. The driver's side mirror had been repaired twice. The engine made strange noises when temperatures dropped. But it ran. And it was hers. Naomi smiled, then climbed inside. She had no idea that in a few hours she would be standing inside one of the most expensive homes in California. No idea she would become the target of a billionaire's public humiliation. No idea her life was moving toward a collision that would change everything. All she knew was that Ethan was waiting. And whenever she thought about him, the future seemed a little less frightening, a little brighter, a little easier to believe in. Across the country, in Beverly Hills, Richard Whitmore was preparing for his gala. And in South Chicago, Naomi Brooks was driving toward the man she loved. Neither of them realized they were racing toward the same night, the same confrontation, the same moment that would force everyone to reveal exactly who they truly were, including Naomi herself. Because before anyone could understand why Richard Whitmore hated her so much, they first needed to understand why Ethan Whitmore fell in love with her. The first time Ethan walked into the Hope Street community kitchen, he wasn't looking for love. He wasn't even looking for purpose. He was looking for a photograph, a marketing photograph, a public relations photograph, a photograph his father's company could post online with a carefully crafted caption about community engagement and corporate responsibility. That was all. The camera crew arrived 15 minutes before Ethan did. 3 employees from Whitmore Group unloaded equipment from a white van parked outside. A young marketing manager named Lisa checked her tablet every 30 seconds. A photographer adjusted lenses. An assistant carried boxes filled with company-branded jackets. Everything was planned. Everything was scripted. Everything except Naomi. Ethan arrived wearing jeans, a navy jacket, and the exhausted expression of a man who had spent too much of his life attending meetings he didn't care about. At 32, he was already being groomed to inherit a fortune. Board meetings, investor dinners, charity galas, political fundraisers. His calendar was full. His life felt empty. The moment he entered the community kitchen, the smell of fresh soup hit him. Then came laughter, real laughter. Not the polite laughter he heard in corporate boardrooms. Not the fake laughter people offered powerful men. Real laughter. Warm laughter. Human laughter. His eyes followed the sound and landed on Naomi Brooks. She was kneeling beside a little boy near one of the tables. The boy couldn't have been older than 7. One shoelace dragged across the floor. Naomi was tying it. The photographer immediately noticed. Perfect. The marketing manager smiled. This is great. The camera lifted, ready to capture a beautiful image. But before anyone could take the picture, Naomi finished tying the shoe and gently touched the boy's shoulder. There. The boy grinned. Thanks. Try not to trip over your own feet now. The child laughed and ran off. Only then did Naomi notice the camera. Her smile disappeared, not because she was angry, because she was uncomfortable. She walked over. If you're filming the kids, you need permission from their parents. The photographer blinked. The marketing manager looked surprised. Most people became nervous around expensive cameras. Naomi didn't. We're just getting a few shots for the company website, Lisa explained. Naomi folded her arms. Then make sure nobody ends up online who doesn't want to be. Ethan watched the exchange from across the room. Interesting. Very interesting. Most people acted differently when wealthy companies showed up. Most people suddenly became eager to impress. Naomi seemed more concerned about protecting strangers. That got his attention. The volunteer coordinator approached. Introductions were made. Hands were shaken. Then the event began. Employees served food. Photographers snapped pictures. Everyone performed their assigned roles. Except Ethan. Instead of posing for photographs, he found himself watching Naomi. Not in a romantic way. Not yet. In a curious way. A fascinated way. She moved through the room like somebody who genuinely belonged there, checking on people, helping elderly guests carry trays, making sure nobody sat alone, remembering names, remembering stories, remembering details. A veteran mentioned a doctor's appointment. Naomi remembered the date. A grandmother asked about donated winter coats. Naomi knew exactly where they were stored. A teenager quietly asked for food to take home. Naomi slipped extra containers into a bag without embarrassing him. Nobody applauded. Nobody noticed. Except Ethan. And the more he watched, the more confused he became. Because she wasn't doing any of it for attention. She wasn't performing kindness. She simply was kind. There was a difference. A huge difference. One Ethan had rarely encountered. Toward the end of the event, he found himself standing beside her near the serving counter. She was stacking empty trays. He cleared his throat. Busy day. Without looking up, she answered. Most days are. You work here full time? Pretty much. She finally looked at him. Brown eyes, calm eyes, the kind of eyes that seemed capable of seeing through people. You look disappointed. Ethan blinked. What? She smiled slightly. The photos. What about them? You expected something different. The observation caught him off guard. Why would you think that? Naomi nodded toward the camera crew. People usually expect dramatic stories. She stacked another tray. Sad stories photograph better. For a moment, Ethan didn't know what to say. Then he laughed. A real laugh. Unexpected. Naomi looked surprised. What? You just described half of corporate America. That earned a genuine smile. A small one, but genuine. For reasons he couldn't explain, Ethan found himself wanting to see it again. Over the next week, he thought about her more than he expected. Then again, the week after that. He told himself it was curiosity. Nothing more. But curiosity kept bringing him back. The following Saturday, he returned. No photographers, no marketing team, no company event. Just him. He showed up carrying 2 boxes of donated groceries. Naomi spotted him immediately. You get lost? He laughed. No. You know this isn't a photo shoot today. I know. She raised an eyebrow. Then why are you here? Ethan glanced around. People were unloading supplies. Volunteers carried boxes. Children ran between tables. I thought maybe you could use help. Naomi studied him carefully, almost suspiciously. Then she pointed toward a storage room. Good. She handed him a broom. We're cleaning. 3 hours later, Ethan was covered in dust. His expensive sneakers were ruined. His back hurt. and he was happier than he'd been in months, maybe years. When lunch break arrived, he found himself sitting beside Naomi on the back steps. The city stretched around them. Brick buildings, fire escapes, traffic, life. Neither of them spoke for a while. Then Naomi offered him half a sandwich. "No thanks," she shrugged. "Your loss." A minute later, she held it out again. "You sure?" Ethan accepted. She smiled. "I knew it." Over the following months, Saturdays became Sundays. Sundays became weeknights. Sometimes Ethan volunteered. Sometimes he simply sat and talked. And somehow those conversations became the best part of his week. He told her things he rarely admitted. How lonely wealth could feel. How every relationship seemed connected to money. How exhausting it was living inside expectations that were never his. Naomi listened. Not because he was rich, not because he was important, because he was human. And for perhaps the first time in his life, Ethan felt seen. One evening, they sat outside a diner after serving meals all day. Rain tapped softly against the awning overhead. Streetlights reflected in puddles. The city glowed gold and silver. Naomi stirred her coffee. "You know what your problem is?" Ethan laughed. "Just one? You spend too much time trying to become who everybody wants. And you forgot to figure out who you are." The words hit harder than she realized, because deep down, Ethan knew she was right. For years, he had followed the path laid out by his father. The right schools, the right career, the right social circles, the right future. Everything had been planned. Everything except this. Except her. Weeks later, standing outside the community kitchen, Ethan finally asked the question he'd been carrying for months. "Would you like dinner?" Naomi looked amused. "We've had dinner, no." He smiled nervously. "A real date." For a moment, she simply stared, then laughed. Not cruelly, warmly. "You realize you're terrible at this." "Very aware." She considered him, then nodded. "Okay." The smile that spread across Ethan's face surprised both of them. And from that moment forward, everything began to change. Not dramatically, not all at once, just one day at a time. One conversation, one laugh, one shared meal, one act of kindness, one growing certainty. The certainty that neither of them had expected to find, but both of them desperately needed. The problem was that Ethan still hadn't told her the whole truth. Naomi knew he worked in business. She knew he came from money. She knew his family was wealthy. But she didn't know exactly how wealthy. She didn't know his last name opened doors across America. She didn't know Richard Whitmore. She didn't know the empire waiting behind him. And Ethan kept postponing the conversation. Tomorrow. Next week. Soon. Always soon. Because for the first time in his life, somebody liked him before they knew what his family owned. And part of him was terrified that once Naomi learned the truth, everything would change. Unfortunately, fate had other plans, because somewhere in Beverly Hills, Richard Whitmore had just learned his son was spending nearly every weekend with a woman from South Chicago. And unlike Ethan, Richard had no intention of waiting to meet her. The first file arrived on Richard Whitmore's desk on a Tuesday morning. A thin man in an expensive suit placed a black folder beside Richard's coffee and quietly left the office. Richard didn't open it right away. He finished reviewing quarterly reports, signed 3 contracts, rejected a merger proposal. Only then did he reach for the folder. The label read, Naomi Brooks. Richard flipped it open. Address, employment history, education, family background, financial records, volunteer activities, everything private reduced to paper, everything human reduced to data. The billionaire read in silence. By the time he reached the final page, his expression had hardened. South Chicago. Community kitchen. No wealthy relatives. No powerful connections. No elite schools. No social status. Nothing Richard valued. He closed the folder. This is the woman? His assistant nodded. Yes, sir. Richard leaned back in his chair. The floor-to-ceiling windows behind him overlooked Beverly Hills. Palm trees swayed in the morning sun. Luxury cars glided through pristine streets. The world Richard understood. The world he controlled. And somewhere inside that world, his son had fallen in love with someone Richard considered entirely unacceptable. A slow irritation began building inside him. Not because Naomi had done anything wrong, because she didn't fit the future he had already chosen for Ethan. The future had been planned for years. The right marriage, the right family, the right connections, the right image, everything carefully arranged. Then Naomi Brooks appeared and disrupted all of it. Richard hated disruptions, especially ones he couldn't buy, especially ones his son refused to see. A week later, Ethan flew to Chicago. The moment he stepped out of the airport, Naomi was waiting near the pickup lane. Wind played with loose strands of her hair. A smile spread across her face the second she saw him. Not because of his money, not because of his last name, simply because he was Ethan. That realization still amazed him. He wrapped her in a hug. For a moment, the airport disappeared. The noise, the crowds, the pressure, all of it faded. Miss me? Naomi asked. More than I should. She laughed. The sound warmed something inside him. The rest of the afternoon passed exactly the way Richard Whitmore would have hated. No private clubs, no luxury shopping, no celebrity restaurants, just two people walking through the city. They shared hot dogs from a street vendor, browsed a used bookstore, argued over whether deep dish pizza was overrated. By sunset, they found themselves sitting near Lake Michigan. The sky glowed orange and gold. Waves rolled gently against the shoreline. Families walked along the path. Children chased birds. For a while, neither spoke. They simply watched the water. Eventually, Naomi broke the silence. Can I ask you something? Anything. She hesitated. That alone made Ethan nervous. Naomi rarely hesitated. What? She stared at the lake. Why me? The question caught him off guard. What do you mean? You know what I mean. Her voice was soft. I've met your friends. Ethan immediately understood. The women, the socialites, the executives, the daughters of wealthy families, women who looked like they belonged beside a man like him, at least according to society, according to Richard, according to people who measured human worth with bank accounts. Naomi continued. They all seem so polished. Ethan smiled slightly. Polished? You know. She laughed nervously. They belong in fancy places. And you don't? She shrugged. I belong where I belong. The answer bothered him. Not because she was wrong, because she genuinely believed it. Years of being underestimated had taught her to lower her expectations, to prepare for disappointment, to assume doors would close. Ethan reached for her hand. Look at me. She did. The wind moved softly around them. You know why I love being with you? Naomi smiled. Because I'm hilarious. Besides that. She laughed. Ethan squeezed her hand. You don't pretend. The smile faded. He continued. Everybody around me pretends. Not everybody. Almost everybody. He stared toward the water. People tell me what they think I want to hear. What they think my family wants to hear. What they think money wants to hear. Naomi listened quietly. But you don't. He looked back at her. You tell the truth. The evening light reflected in her eyes. You help people when nobody's watching. You care about things most people ignore. You make every room better the second you walk into it. A faint blush appeared on her cheeks. Ethan smiled. And honestly? What? You terrify me. That made her laugh. Me? Absolutely. Why? Because you see right through me. She shook her head. No, I don't. Yes, you do. And they both knew it was true. For the first time in years, Ethan felt understood. Not admired, not managed, not positioned. Understood. The realization grew stronger with every passing week. Months slipped by. Their relationship deepened. Ethan spent more time in Chicago. Naomi spent more time imagining a future she never thought possible. For the first time in her life, happiness felt real. Dangerously real. One snowy evening in December, they stood outside the community kitchen after a holiday fundraiser. Fresh snow covered parked cars. Christmas lights glowed from apartment windows. The city looked softer somehow. Kinder. Volunteers loaded donated toys into trucks. Children laughed nearby. Naomi watched them. You know what I always wanted when I was little? Ethan asked. What? A tree. She looked surprised. A Christmas tree? He nodded. An actual tree. Naomi frowned. You were rich. Not when I was little. She blinked. Ethan laughed. My dad became a billionaire later. I didn't know that. There was a time before all of this. He pointed vaguely toward the sky. The private jets, the mansions, the headlines. Naomi smiled. I can't picture it. Neither can most people. For a moment they stood in silence. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket. His heartbeat immediately accelerated. This was it. The moment. The moment he'd imagined for months. The moment that terrified him. Because everything could change afterward. Naomi noticed. What are you doing? Ethan dropped to one knee. Her eyes widened. The world seemed to stop. Snow drifted softly around them. The city noise faded. Volunteers froze. Someone gasped. A child whispered, "No way." Ethan barely heard any of it. He only saw Naomi. Only her. His voice shook. For perhaps the first time in years. Naomi Brooks. Tears instantly filled her eyes. You make me better. His throat tightened. You make me kinder. You make me braver. You make me feel like the person I always wanted to be. A tear slipped down her cheek. Ethan smiled. I don't care where we live. I don't care what people think. I don't care how impossible this seems. He opened the ring box. The diamond sparkled beneath the streetlights. Will you marry me? For a moment, Naomi couldn't speak. She covered her mouth, cried, laughed, then cried again. The answer finally emerged through tears. Yes. Cheers exploded around them. Volunteers applauded. Children jumped up and down. Someone started crying. Naomi threw her arms around Ethan, and for a few beautiful minutes, the future felt perfect. But hundreds of miles away, inside a Beverly Hills mansion, Richard Whitmore was staring at a photograph that had just arrived on his phone. The image showed Ethan on one knee. A ring, a proposal, a celebration. Richard's face darkened. The room grew silent. His assistant stood motionless. Nobody dared speak. Richard slowly set down his phone. Then he uttered 6 words that would change everything. "Get me Naomi Brooks immediately." Because Richard Whitmore had finally decided to stop watching from a distance. And when he moved, lives changed. Usually not for the better. 3 days after the proposal, Naomi received a phone call she didn't expect. She was stocking canned goods at the community kitchen when her cell phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally she ignored unknown numbers. Too many robocalls, too many sales pitches. Something made her answer anyway. "Hello?" A calm female voice responded. "Miss Brooks?" "Yes." "My name is Catherine Reeves. I work for Mr. Richard Whitmore." Naomi froze. Across the room, volunteers continued sorting food. Someone laughed near the pantry. Life carried on. But for Naomi, everything suddenly felt still. "I'd like to arrange a meeting." Naomi already knew who Richard Whitmore was. Not because Ethan had wanted to tell her, because eventually he had no choice. The truth had come out 6 weeks earlier. The truth that Ethan wasn't simply successful. He was one of the heirs to one of the wealthiest families in America. She still remembered that conversation. The guilt in Ethan's eyes. The fear. The way he'd expected her to leave. Instead, she had laughed, then asked if he was still terrible at bowling. He had looked confused. "What does that have to do with anything?" "Just checking." The relief that crossed his face remained one of her favorite memories. Money had never mattered to her. People did. Always people. Now she found herself gripping a shelf while listening to Richard Whitmore's assistant. "When?" Naomi asked. "Tomorrow." "Where?" "The Grand Regency." Naomi nearly laughed. The Grand Regency Hotel was the kind of place she had only seen in magazines. "Mr. Whitmore would appreciate your discretion." The line disconnected. No explanation, no request, no invitation. Just instructions. Exactly what Naomi expected from a billionaire. That evening she told Ethan. Predictably, he hated the idea. No. They sat in a small diner near the community kitchen. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Neon signs reflected red and blue across the glass. "No?" Naomi repeated. "No." Ethan shook his head. "You don't have to do this. He wants to meet me. He wants to control the situation." Naomi stirred her coffee. "Maybe. Definitely." The certainty in his voice made her pause. "You think it'll be that bad?" Ethan looked away. That answer alone was enough. For the first time, Naomi saw genuine concern in his eyes. Not embarrassment. Not frustration. Concern. "He doesn't know you." "Then maybe he should." Ethan laughed quietly. There was no humor in it. "That's exactly what scares me." The next afternoon, Naomi stood in front of the Grand Regency. The building rose above downtown Chicago like something from another world. Polished glass, uniformed doormen, luxury cars arriving every few minutes. Everything expensive. Everything immaculate. Everything designed to remind visitors exactly how much money lived inside. Naomi looked down at her reflection in the revolving door. Simple navy dress. Second-hand coat. Practical shoes. Nothing flashy. Nothing impressive. Just Naomi. She entered anyway. The lobby felt larger than some apartment buildings. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Marble floors reflected warm golden light. A pianist played softly in the corner. People moved through the space dressed in clothes that probably cost more than her monthly rent. A hostess guided her toward a private dining room. Richard Whitmore was already waiting. He sat alone near a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the city skyline. Perfect posture. Perfect suit. perfect control. Everything about him seemed deliberate, calculated. Even the way he lifted his coffee cup. He didn't stand when she arrived, didn't offer a handshake, didn't smile. He simply looked at her, evaluated her, measured her, like an investor inspecting a risky asset. Miss Brooks, Mr. Whitmore. She sat across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. The silence stretched, intentional. Richard wanted her uncomfortable. Naomi recognized the tactic immediately. She had met people like him before. Not billionaires, but people who believed power was proven through intimidation. Eventually, Richard broke the silence. "You love my son." The statement surprised her. Not because of the words, because of how flat they sounded. Like a business question. Not a father's concern. "I do." Richard nodded slowly. "And Ethan loves you." She waited. There was always a but. The billionaire leaned back. "Do you know what Ethan is worth?" Naomi blinked. "I'm sorry?" "His trust." His voice remained calm. "His investments. His future ownership stake." He named a number. A very large number. The kind of number most people never hear spoken aloud. Naomi stared. Richard watched her carefully, waiting, expecting, looking for greed. Instead, she simply shrugged. The billionaire frowned. "You don't seem impressed." "Should I be?" For the first time, Richard looked slightly annoyed. He wasn't used to unpredictable responses. Most people reacted exactly as expected. Fear, excitement, ambition. Naomi offered none of them. Richard reached into a leather portfolio beside his chair, then placed a white envelope on the table. Slowly, deliberately. The envelope slid across polished wood toward her. Naomi didn't touch it. "What is it?" "Open it." She did. Inside was a check. Her eyes widened. $250,000. More money than she had ever seen in one place. For a moment she thought there must be a mistake. Then Richard spoke. "There isn't a mistake. Of course there wasn't." The billionaire folded his hands. "You leave Ethan." Naomi looked up. Richard continued. "You walk away. You disappear from his life. You never contact him again." The words settled heavily between them. Outside the window, traffic moved through the city. People hurried down sidewalks. Clouds drifted over distant buildings. The world remained unchanged. But inside that room, something cold entered the air. Naomi looked back at the check, then at Richard, then back at the check. The billionaire smiled, a small smile. The smile of a man who believed every problem had a price. "You can help your community center." He nodded toward the envelope. "You can buy a house, pay debts, take care of yourself." The smile widened slightly. "Everybody wins." Naomi suddenly understood something. Richard genuinely believed he was being generous. He genuinely thought she would thank him. Because in his world, money solved everything, including love, including people, including dignity. The realization saddened her more than it angered her. Slowly, Naomi slid the envelope back across the table. The smile disappeared. Richard stared. Perhaps for the first time in years, somebody had returned his money. "No." The billionaire blinked. "No? No." Richard's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps you misunderstood." "I understood perfectly." Naomi's voice remained calm. "You want me to leave Ethan?" "Correct." "I'm not doing that." The silence returned. this time sharper, colder, more dangerous. Richard leaned forward. What exactly do you think happens here? The question wasn't really a question. It was a warning. Naomi met his gaze. The city reflected behind him. Glass, steel, power, control, everything Richard valued. And somehow she wasn't intimidated, because she had survived things money couldn't fix. Hospital bills, evictions, loss, grief, fear. People like Richard always underestimated that. I think, Naomi said softly, that you love your son. Richard's expression didn't change. But I think you're so afraid of losing control that you can't tell the difference between protecting him and owning him. The words landed harder than she intended. The billionaire went completely still. A dangerous stillness. For several seconds, neither moved, neither spoke. Finally, Richard stood. The meeting was over. Not because Naomi had lost, because she hadn't. His voice dropped lower, colder. You have no idea what world you're walking into. Naomi rose from her chair. No. She picked up her coat. But I know Ethan. Richard laughed once, a humorless sound. Then he looked directly into her eyes. And for the first time all afternoon, Naomi saw genuine hostility. Not concern, not skepticism. Hostility. If money won't convince you, he paused. Something dark flickered behind his expression. We'll try a different approach. A chill moved through Naomi. Not fear exactly, but warning. The kind that arrives right before a storm. She left the hotel without another word. Outside, cold wind swept through the city streets. The sun was beginning to set. Traffic lights blinked red and amber. People rushed home. Life continued. Yet Naomi couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. Because it had. Richard Whitmore no longer viewed her as a temporary inconvenience. Now he viewed her as an obstacle. And men like Richard Whitmore rarely stopped after hearing the word no. Far above the city, dark clouds gathered over the skyline. The first drops of rain began to fall, and neither Naomi nor Ethan realized that an entirely different encounter was waiting just around the corner. One rainy night, one bus stop, one stranger, and one act of kindness that would eventually change everything. The rain started just after 9. Not a gentle rain, not the kind that tapped politely against windows. This rain came hard, cold, relentless, the kind that emptied sidewalks and sent people running for shelter. By 10 o'clock, South Chicago looked completely different. Streetlights reflected off black pavement. Water streamed along curbs. Store owners hurried to lock their doors. The city seemed to shrink beneath the storm. Naomi Brooks finally stepped out of the community kitchen a little after 10:30. She pulled her coat tighter around herself and locked the front door. Most of the volunteers had gone home hours ago. Only Naomi remained, as usual. The evening had been busy. A local shelter needed extra food deliveries. An elderly woman needed transportation home. A young father had arrived with 2 hungry children and nowhere else to go. By the time everything was handled, the storm had arrived. Naomi checked her phone. A text from Ethan. Made it back to LA. Miss you already. The message brought an immediate smile. She typed back. Drive safe tomorrow. And don't forget your meeting. A reply came almost instantly. I forgot the meeting the second you texted me. Naomi laughed, then slipped the phone into her pocket. The rain continued pouring. Her car was parked 3 blocks away. She started walking. The neighborhood felt strangely quiet. The only sounds were tires moving through puddles and distant thunder rolling across the sky. Halfway to her car, she noticed something unusual. A city bus sat parked near a stop at the corner. Its lights glowed through sheets of rain. The bus itself wasn't strange. The figure beneath the shelter was. An older man sat alone on the metal bench, head lowered, shoulders slumped, completely soaked. At first, Naomi assumed he was waiting for transportation. Then she looked closer. Something wasn't right. The man wasn't moving. Cars drove past. Nobody stopped. A cyclist hurried through the intersection. 2 pedestrians crossed the street. Everyone noticed him. Nobody helped. Naomi hesitated. She was tired, cold, ready to go home. Then she remembered something her mother used to say. If you keep walking after seeing someone suffer, you'll spend the rest of the night wondering if they're okay. The problem with Naomi Brooks was that she always stopped. Always. She changed direction and crossed the street. Rain soaked her hair almost immediately. The closer she got, the more concerned she became. The man looked to be in his late 60s, maybe early 70s. White hair, dark overcoat, expensive shoes. Not the appearance of someone who normally sat alone at bus stops in bad neighborhoods during storms. "Sir?" No response. Naomi stepped closer. "Sir?" The man slowly lifted his head. His face looked pale, confused, exhausted. For a brief moment, relief crossed Naomi's face. At least he was conscious. Then she noticed his hand trembling. "You okay?" The man tried to answer. The words came out weak. "I'm fine." People who were fine rarely looked like that. Naomi knelt beside him. Rain hammered the shelter roof above them. "When's the last time you ate?" The stranger blinked. Apparently nobody had asked him that question in a very long time. "I don't remember." That was enough. Naomi immediately opened her bag. Inside was a wrapped sandwich she had planned to eat at home. Without hesitation, she handed it to him. The man stared. "You don't have to do that." "I know." He accepted it slowly, as though the gesture confused him. Naomi watched him take a few bites. Color gradually returned to his face. "A little. Not enough." "You have family nearby?" "No." "Friends?" The man laughed softly. A tired laugh. "Not nearby." Something about that answer felt lonely. Deeply lonely. Naomi understood loneliness. Not the temporary kind. The real kind. The kind that sits beside you in hospital waiting rooms. The kind that follows you home. The kind that stays after everyone else leaves. Thunder rolled overhead. The man suddenly grabbed the edge of the bench. His face tightened. Naomi immediately noticed. Pain. Real pain. Not dramatic. Not exaggerated. The kind older people often tried to hide. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No." The answer came too quickly, too forcefully. Naomi folded her arms. "Yes." "I don't need, sir." Her voice sharpened. The same voice she used with stubborn elderly neighbors. The same voice she used with children trying to avoid doctors. "You can argue with me later." The stranger actually smiled. Despite the pain, despite the rain, despite the situation. For reasons he couldn't explain, he liked her immediately. Perhaps because she treated him like a person instead of a title, a human being instead of a problem. Most people hadn't done that in years. Naomi called emergency services, then removed her own coat. The cold air instantly hit her shoulders. The stranger noticed. "What are you doing? You need it more. You'll freeze, I'll survive." Before he could protest, she draped the coat across his shoulders. The man looked genuinely stunned. Not grateful. Stunned. as if kindness itself had become unfamiliar. 10 minutes later, paramedics arrived. The ambulance lights painted the rain-soaked street in flashes of red and white. Naomi stayed. She helped answer questions. She helped gather the man's belongings. She even rode behind the ambulance to Mercy General Hospital. The stranger kept insisting she should leave. Naomi ignored him. Hospitals after midnight always felt different, quieter, softer, almost suspended in time. Rain tapped against the emergency room windows. Televisions played muted news broadcasts. Coffee machines hummed in distant hallways. The stranger sat in an observation room while doctors ran tests. Naomi waited outside. 1 hour passed, then 2. She could have gone home. Most people would have. Instead, she sat beneath fluorescent lights reading an outdated magazine. Around 1:30 in the morning, a nurse approached. "He's asking for you." Naomi stood. The stranger looked much better. Color had returned to his face. His breathing appeared steady. The doctors had ruled out anything serious. Exhaustion, dehydration, stress, a combination of things. The man smiled when she entered. "You stayed." The statement sounded almost disbelieving. Naomi shrugged. "You would have done the same." The old man laughed. "No." She frowned. "What?" "I probably wouldn't have." For a moment, neither spoke. The honesty surprised her. Finally, he extended a hand. "I'm Charles." Naomi shook it. "Naomi." "Thank you, Naomi." His voice carried genuine emotion. Not performance. Not politeness. Emotion. She smiled. "No problem." Charles studied her carefully. "You don't know who I am." The question seemed strange. "Should I?" He almost laughed. "No." The answer sounded oddly sad. A few seconds passed. Then Charles reached into his coat pocket. He removed a business card. Naomi immediately pushed it back toward him. He blinked. "You don't want it?" "No." The answer genuinely surprised him. Most people always wanted business cards, connections, names, opportunities. Not Naomi. She stood, adjusted her bag, prepared to leave. Charles watched her, still confused, still fascinated. "You're just leaving?" "You're okay." She smiled. "That's what matters." Then she headed toward the door. Charles called after her. "Naomi!" She turned. The old man held her gaze. For a brief second, something unspoken passed between them. Respect, gratitude, recognition. "Don't change." The words felt oddly personal. Naomi smiled. "I wasn't planning to." Then she disappeared into the hallway. Charles remained sitting in silence, listening to distant hospital sounds, thinking about a woman who had given away her dinner, her coat. 3 hours of her night, to help a complete stranger, without asking for anything. Not even his name. The realization stayed with him long after she left, because men like Charles Bennett spent their lives surrounded by people who wanted something. Access, influence, money, advantage. Naomi had wanted none of it, and for the first time in a very long time, Charles found himself unable to stop thinking about someone he had just met. Outside, the rain finally began to ease. Naomi walked toward her car beneath thinning clouds. She never looked back, never wondered who Charles really was, never imagined she would see him again. But fate was already moving pieces into place. And hundreds of miles away, Richard Whitmore was preparing a very different kind of storm. One that would explode beneath crystal chandeliers, in front of politicians, executives, journalists, and everyone who mattered to him. A gala, a trap, and a public humiliation that would soon force Ethan Whitmore to make the most important choice of his life. The invitation arrived on a Thursday morning. Heavy cream-colored paper, embossed gold lettering, a black ribbon wrapped around the envelope. Everything about it looked expensive, intentional. The kind of invitation designed to impress before it was even opened. Naomi found it waiting in her mailbox when she returned home from the community kitchen. For a moment she smiled. The Whitmore Foundation Annual Gala, Beverly Hills. Formal attire required. Guests included business leaders, politicians, philanthropists, and members of the national press. At the bottom was a handwritten note. Ethan and guest. Naomi immediately called him. "You invited me?" Ethan hesitated. The pause told her everything. "What?" "It's complicated." Her smile faded. "Ethan." A long silence followed. Then he sighed. "My father invited me." "And?" "And he specifically told me not to bring you." The apartment suddenly felt smaller. The invitation seemed heavier, more personal, more insulting. Naomi stared at the elegant paper. "Then why is there a guest invitation?" "Because he assumes I'll bring someone else." The answer hurt more than she expected. Not because she believed Ethan would, because somebody else believed he should. Someone with enough power to organize an entire event around that assumption. Ethan's voice softened. "I don't want to go. You have to." "No." "Yes." Naomi sat near the window. Outside, children played basketball beneath fading afternoon sunlight. Life moved normally. Inside, something felt different. "He wants a reaction." She spoke quietly. "If you don't go, he wins." "I don't care." "I do." Another pause. Then Ethan laughed softly. "You always sound smarter than me." "That's because I am." The laugh came easier this time. For a few moments they simply talked. The way couples do. The way people do when they love each other enough to make difficult things feel manageable. Eventually, Ethan asked the question both had been avoiding. "Will you come?" Naomi looked down at the invitation. Part of her wanted to refuse. Part of her wanted nothing to do with Richard Whitmore. No gala, no ballroom, no wealthy strangers, no judgmental stares, no uncomfortable conversations. Just peace, just normal life. But another part of her knew something. Bullies depended on retreat, on silence, on people quietly stepping aside. Richard Whitmore expected her to disappear, expected her to make things easier, expected her to feel unworthy. Naomi slowly smiled. "Of course I'm coming." Ethan laughed. Now she could hear relief in his voice. "Really? Really, I love you." The words came instantly, without hesitation, without performance. Naomi closed her eyes. "I love you too." After hanging up, she placed the invitation on her kitchen table, then stared at it, for a very long time. Across the country, Richard Whitmore received completely different news. His assistant entered the office carrying a tablet. "Sir?" Richard didn't look up from the financial reports spread across his desk. "What?" Ethan confirmed attendance. The billionaire nodded. Expected. Predictable. His son rarely missed major company events. Then came the second part. He plans to bring Naomi Brooks. Richard's pen stopped moving. The office grew silent. Slowly, he looked up. "What?" The assistant swallowed. She accepted. For several seconds, Richard simply stared. Then he leaned back in his chair. A cold smile appeared. Not amusement. Calculation. Good. The assistant blinked. Good? That wasn't the reaction she expected. Richard stood. Walked toward the window. The Los Angeles skyline stretched beyond the glass. Power, influence, control. The things he understood best. If Naomi wanted to attend, fine. If Ethan wanted to challenge him publicly, fine. The billionaire had spent decades crushing opposition. One stubborn woman from South Chicago wasn't going to change that. In fact, her attendance solved a problem. Now everyone could see exactly why she didn't belong. The thought pleased him, very much. Meanwhile, preparations continued. The gala grew larger by the day. News outlets confirmed attendance. Investors arrived from New York, political figures from Washington, technology executives, real estate moguls, media personalities. 300 of the most connected people Richard Whitmore knew. A perfect audience. Exactly the kind of audience Richard preferred. Because humiliation only mattered when witnesses were present. 2 days before the event, Naomi visited Denise at the community kitchen. She hadn't mentioned the gala before, mostly because she hoped talking about it would make it feel less intimidating. The opposite happened. A Beverly Hills gala? Denise nearly dropped a tray. With billionaires? Apparently. You? Unfortunately. Denise laughed, then looked serious. Are you nervous? Naomi considered the question. The answer surprised her. A little. A little? Denise folded her arms. I'd be terrified. Naomi smiled. So would I. The older woman studied her carefully, then nodded. Good. What? You should be nervous. Naomi frowned. That's encouraging. Denise laughed. No, listen. She pointed toward the dining room. Several volunteers were helping elderly guests. A little girl sat coloring at one table. An older veteran read a newspaper near the window. This place matters because you care. Naomi listened. You don't become somebody different because rich people are watching. The words settled gently, like reassurance, like truth. Denise continued. You walk into that room exactly the same way you walk into this one. Naomi smiled. And if they don't like me, then they're idiots. That answer made both women laugh. But later that night, alone in her apartment, the anxiety returned. The closet door stood open. Dresses hung inside. Not many. Certainly not gala dresses. Naomi pulled out 3 possibilities. One too casual. One too old. One that almost worked. Almost. She sat on the edge of the bed, suddenly exhausted. The truth was, she had never cared much about appearances. Most of her life had been focused elsewhere. Bills, family, work, helping people, surviving. Not galas, not luxury, not social status. Her phone buzzed. A message from Ethan. Check your door. Confused, Naomi walked to the apartment entrance. Outside sat a large garment bag, along with a note. Just trust me. She laughed immediately, then carried it inside. Carefully, she unzipped the bag. The dress inside took her breath away. Simple, elegant, deep midnight blue. Nothing flashy, nothing excessive. Beautiful. Tears unexpectedly filled her eyes. Not because of the dress, because Ethan understood her. He hadn't chosen something designed to impress rich people. He had chosen something that felt like her. The realization warmed her heart. For a moment she forgot about Richard. Forgot about the gala. Forgot about everything except the man she loved. Thousands of miles away, another man sat alone in a private office reviewing guest lists. Richard Whitmore studied every name, every seat assignment, every table arrangement, every detail. Then he reached one specific name, Naomi Brooks. The billionaire stared at it. His jaw tightened. His fingers tapped slowly against polished wood. A decision formed. One final adjustment. One final preparation. The trap needed to be perfect, because Richard Whitmore wasn't planning a celebration. He was planning a lesson. A lesson for Ethan, a lesson for Naomi, and a lesson for anyone who forgot who controlled the room. The evening of the gala arrived. Sunset painted Beverly Hills in gold and crimson. Luxury cars lined the streets. Valets moved quickly. Camera flashes illuminated arriving guests. Inside the mansion, crystal chandeliers glowed like captured stars. The ballroom shimmered beneath layers of wealth. Every detail flawless. Every detail expensive. Richard Whitmore stood near the grand staircase watching guests arrive. Confident. Relaxed. Certain. Then a black town car rolled toward the entrance. The valet opened the door. Ethan stepped out first, perfectly dressed, calm, determined. Richard's smile faded, because a second figure emerged from the car, a woman wearing a midnight blue dress, graceful, elegant, unapologetic. Naomi Brooks, and the moment she took Ethan's hand and walked toward the entrance, Richard Whitmore realized she had no intention of disappearing. The gala hadn't even begun, and already the collision was unavoidable. The moment Naomi stepped through the front doors of the Whitmore estate, she felt it. The eyes, hundreds of them, some curious, some judgmental, some openly surprised. The ballroom stretched before her like something from a movie. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Golden light reflected across polished marble floors. White orchids filled towering centerpieces. A string quartet played softly near the grand staircase. Waiters moved silently through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne. Everything shimmered. Everything sparkled. Everything felt very far away from South Chicago. For a brief moment, Naomi wondered if everyone could somehow see exactly where she came from. The apartment buildings, the bus routes, the community kitchen, the years of struggle, the years of sacrifice, the years of choosing kindness when life offered very little in return. Beside her, Ethan squeezed her hand. "You okay?" She smiled. "Barely." That earned a small laugh. "Good." "Good? If you're nervous, it means you're paying attention." Naomi rolled her eyes. "That doesn't even make sense. It does in my family." She laughed despite herself. The tension eased slightly, but not completely. Across the ballroom, Richard Whitmore was already watching. The billionaire stood beside several investors. A glass of bourbon rested in one hand. His expression remained calm. Too calm. The kind of calm that usually came before something unpleasant. Naomi felt it immediately. So did Ethan. "He's staring." "Yeah. He looks angry. He always looks angry." The answer should have been comforting. It wasn't. A photographer snapped pictures nearby. Guests mingled. Politicians shook hands. Executives exchanged business cards. Meanwhile, Richard never stopped watching, like a man waiting for exactly the right moment. Half an hour passed, then another. The evening continued. At first, Naomi thought perhaps she had been wrong. Maybe Richard intended to ignore her. Maybe he understood causing a scene would embarrass himself. Maybe... A familiar voice interrupted. "Miss Brooks." Naomi turned. Richard stood only a few feet away. His smile looked polished, practiced, artificial. the smile of a man performing for an audience. Because an audience was exactly what he had, several nearby guests immediately fell silent. Conversations slowed. People sensed something. Predators often created that effect. They changed the atmosphere before they spoke. Richard raised his glass slightly. "I'm surprised you came." Naomi met his gaze. "You invited Ethan. I invited my son." The correction landed sharply. Ethan stepped closer. "Dad." "No." Richard never looked at him. His eyes remained fixed on Naomi. "You misunderstand something." The smile remained, cold and perfect. "This evening celebrates excellence." A few nearby guests exchanged glances. Richard continued. "Achievement, legacy, success." The message was becoming obvious, painfully obvious. Naomi felt heat rising in her chest. Still, she remained silent. Richard took another sip of bourbon. "And yet somehow you ended up here." A few people laughed nervously. Not because it was funny, because wealthy people often laugh when powerful men expect them to. Ethan's expression darkened. "Enough." Richard finally turned toward him. For the first time all evening, the smile disappeared. "No." His voice carried farther now, louder, sharper. People nearby stopped talking entirely. The string quartet continued playing, but even they seemed quieter, more cautious. Richard set his glass on a passing tray, then stepped into the center of the ballroom. The movement was deliberate, calculated. Every eye followed him. Within seconds, hundreds of conversations began fading, like waves pulling back before a storm. Naomi immediately understood. This wasn't spontaneous. This wasn't emotional. This was planned. Richard turned toward the crowd, toward the room, toward the audience he had carefully assembled. 300 witnesses. Exactly what he wanted. "Ladies and gentlemen." The microphone wasn't necessary. Years of boardrooms had trained Richard's voice perfectly. People stopped talking. The quartet lowered their instruments. Silence spread. Slowly. Completely. Then Richard pointed directly at Naomi, the same way he would later in everyone's memory, the same image people would discuss for years. "I have a family matter to address." A chill moved through the room. Ethan stepped forward. "Dad, don't." Richard ignored him. His eyes never left Naomi. "This woman." The words echoed through the ballroom. Every guest turned. Every camera shifted. Every conversation disappeared. Naomi felt suddenly exposed. Not physically, emotionally, like standing alone beneath a spotlight. Richard continued. "This woman intends to become part of the Whitmore family." The silence grew heavier. Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The billionaire laughed softly. "As if she belongs here." A sharp pain settled in Naomi's chest. Not because of the insult, because of the people watching. The people saying nothing. The people looking away. The people choosing comfort over courage. Ethan stepped beside her. "Stop it." Richard turned. "No." Then came the first real blow. "Do you know where she's from?" The question wasn't meant to be answered. "South Chicago." His voice sharpened. "A neighborhood known for poverty." More silence. A woman with no connections, no influence, no understanding of this world. Naomi could feel hundreds of eyes on her, some sympathetic, some uncomfortable, others simply curious, watching, observing, waiting to see what happened next. Richard wasn't finished, not even close. "I offered her money." Gasps rippled through portions of the room. The billionaire smiled. Generous money, still watching Naomi. Enough to walk away with dignity. A pause. She refused. More murmurs. More whispers. Naomi stood perfectly still. Every instinct told her to leave, to escape, to disappear. But she didn't. Because leaving would mean surrendering. And she had spent too much of her life surviving to surrender now. Richard's voice rose. Not shouting, projecting, controlling. Do you know why she refused? Nobody answered. The billionaire supplied his own answer. Because she wants something bigger. His finger pointed directly at Ethan. My son. The room tensed. A woman near the staircase covered her mouth. A reporter lowered his glass. Even the waitstaff froze. Richard looked toward Ethan, then spoke the words that shattered the evening. If you marry her. The silence became absolute. You're no longer my son. For one breathtaking moment, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The words hung beneath crystal chandeliers like a verdict. Naomi felt Ethan's hand tighten around hers. The pressure grounded her, kept her standing. Richard continued. You choose tonight. The billionaire spread his arms. The Whitmore family. The company. The inheritance. The future I've spent decades building. His gaze hardened. Or her. The room waited. 300 people. One choice. One moment. One answer. Naomi couldn't look at Ethan. She couldn't. Because deep down a terrible fear had appeared. What if this was too much? What if no one could walk away from everything? What if Richard was right? The thought hurt more than all the insults combined. Then Ethan moved. One step forward, directly between Naomi and his father. And for the first time all night, Richard Whitmore looked uncertain. Just for a second. Because he saw something in his son's eyes. Something he hadn't expected. Not fear, not hesitation. Conviction. The kind Richard couldn't buy, couldn't control, couldn't threaten away. The kind that changes lives, the kind that destroys plans. And Ethan Whitmore was about to make a choice that would shock every person in that ballroom. For a moment, nobody moved. The chandeliers glowed overhead. The string quartet sat frozen near the staircase. Even the waiters seemed trapped in place. 300 guests watched a father and son stand on opposite sides of a line that could never be uncrossed. Richard Whitmore looked completely certain. He had spent his entire life understanding leverage, understanding pressure, understanding what people would sacrifice to protect comfort, to protect wealth, to protect themselves. He knew business. He knew negotiations. He knew fear. And he believed fear would win tonight. It always had before. Across from him, Ethan stood beside Naomi, one hand wrapped around hers, the other hanging quietly at his side. The room waited. Richard waited. Finally, Ethan spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. You really planned all of this? The billionaire's expression remained unchanged. You forced this choice. No. Richard shook his head. You forced it. Ethan laughed once, a sad laugh, the kind that comes when disappointment finally becomes certainty. For years he had defended his father, made excuses, explained away behavior, ignored warning signs, told himself there was more good than bad. Tonight had destroyed all of that. Because for the first time, Richard wasn't attacking a stranger. He was attacking someone Ethan loved. And suddenly, everything looked different. The ballroom, the company, the family, even the man standing in front of him. Richard felt the shift. Every parent knows when a child stops seeing them as a hero. And for the first time in decades, Richard Whitmore felt something dangerously close to panic. Only for a second. Then pride covered it. Pride always covered it. Make your choice. His voice echoed through the room. Ethan looked toward Naomi. She immediately shook her head, almost imperceptibly, a tiny movement. But he understood. She wasn't asking him to choose her. She wasn't asking him to lose everything. That was exactly why he loved her. Because even now, she was thinking about someone else. Thinking about him. Thinking about what this might cost. The realization made the decision easier, not harder. He turned back toward Richard. I already chose. A ripple moved through the ballroom. Small, but unmistakable. Richard narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? It means you lost. The billionaire blinked. For perhaps the first time that evening, genuine confusion crossed his face. Ethan stepped forward. Not aggressively, calmly, deliberately. It means all of this. He gestured toward the mansion, the chandeliers, the ballroom, the wealth, the money, the company, the houses, the cars, the inheritance. His voice remained steady. It only matters if I become someone I'm ashamed of. Nobody spoke. Nobody interrupted. Richard's face slowly hardened. Ethan continued. And if keeping all of it means abandoning Naomi, his hand tightened around hers, then I don't want any of it. The silence that followed felt enormous. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Several investors exchanged stunned looks. A senator stared openly. No one had expected him to actually do it. Not really. People talked about principles all the time. Very few sacrificed billions for them. Richard stared at his son. You don't know what you're saying. I do know. His father's voice sharpened. You don't. Ethan took another step forward. I know exactly what I'm saying. Richard suddenly laughed. Not because anything was funny, because disbelief was turning into anger. You're throwing away your future. No. Ethan shook his head. I'm choosing it. The words landed harder than anyone expected. Even Naomi felt them. Richard certainly did, because something inside the billionaire visibly snapped. The control disappeared. Not completely. Just enough. His mask cracked. The room saw it. For the first time all evening, Richard Whitmore looked rattled, and he hated it. The billionaire reached into his jacket, pulled out a manila folder, then another. Prepared. Organized. Waiting. Of course he had planned everything. He slapped the documents onto a nearby table. The sound echoed through the ballroom. Fine. His voice became cold again. Professional. Corporate. If you want consequences, let's discuss consequences. Several guests looked uncomfortable. Others leaned closer. Richard opened the folder. As of tonight, your executive position at Whitmore Group is terminated. A murmur moved through the crowd. Ethan didn't react. Richard continued. Your company housing privileges are revoked. Nothing. The trust distributions stop immediately. Still nothing. The family accounts are frozen. No response. The billionaire's frustration grew. Each punishment was supposed to matter. Each consequence was supposed to hurt. Yet Ethan remained calm. The realization infuriated him. You think this is a game? Richard demanded. No. Ethan's voice remained steady. I think it's a test. A test? Yeah. Ethan nodded slowly. A test of whether your love has conditions. The words hit harder than any insult. Several guests immediately looked away, because deep down, they already knew the answer. Richard's face reddened. My responsibility is protecting this family. No. Ethan looked directly at him. Your responsibility was loving it. The room went silent again. Even the air felt different. Heavy, painful, raw. Naomi could see something happening behind Richard's eyes. Not reflection, not understanding. Wounded pride. The most dangerous kind. Because wounded pride rarely apologizes. It usually attacks. And Richard Whitmore had spent his entire life attacking. The billionaire pointed toward the exit. Leave. Nobody moved. Richard's voice grew louder. I said, leave. Still, Ethan stood there. Richard took a step forward. If you walk out those doors with her, the billionaire swallowed, don't come back. The statement landed like a final judgment. A father disowning his son. Not legally, emotionally, publicly. 300 witnesses. 300 people who would remember exactly where they stood. Naomi felt her chest tighten, because suddenly this wasn't about wealth anymore. It wasn't about inheritance. It wasn't about status. It was about loss. Real loss. The kind money couldn't repair. She looked at Ethan. The hurt in his eyes nearly broke her heart. Not because he doubted his decision, because he never thought it would come to this. No child imagines losing a parent this way. Not really. Even when they expect conflict. Even when they prepare. The reality still hurts. Richard waited. One final opportunity. One final chance. Choose. The room held its breath. Ethan looked around slowly. At the guests. At the executives. At the investors. At the empire his father had built. Then he looked at Naomi. Everything became simple, because every meaningful thing in his life had happened after meeting her. The laughter, the honesty, the purpose, the peace, the future. Not the future Richard wanted, the future he wanted, and that made all the difference. Without another word, Ethan reached for the documents on the table. Richard frowned. Several guests leaned forward. Slowly, Ethan lifted the papers. The inheritance agreements, the trust documents, the corporate conditions, everything Richard believed mattered. For a brief second, nobody understood what he intended to do. Then the first page tore. The sound cut through the ballroom like lightning. R.I.P. A collective gasp swept through the room. Ethan tore another page, then another, then another. Paper drifted onto polished marble floors, white fragments falling like snow. The crowd stared, completely stunned. Richard looked horrified. Not angry. Not yet. Horrified. Because he suddenly realized something. His son wasn't negotiating. His son wasn't bluffing. His son was leaving. Actually leaving. The final page ripped in half. Silence followed. Absolute silence. Ethan dropped the pieces onto the floor, then looked directly at his father. If money costs me her. His voice remained calm. It's too expensive. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. For several long seconds, the only sound came from the distant fountains outside. Then Richard Whitmore delivered the final punishment. The one he believed would hurt most. The one he had been saving. The billionaire pointed toward the entrance. His voice cold as ice. Get out. Ethan nodded. Not angry. Not defeated. Just finished. Completely finished. Then he turned toward Naomi. She looked close to tears. Not because of the money, because of what he had sacrificed, because of what he had lost. The realization hurt, deeply. She whispered only 4 words. "I'm so sorry." Ethan gently touched her cheek. The crowd disappeared. The ballroom disappeared. Everything disappeared except the woman standing in front of him. "You are not something I lost." The words shattered whatever remained of her composure. Tears finally appeared. Not dramatic tears, quiet ones, real ones. Together they turned toward the exit, toward uncertainty, toward a future neither fully understood. Behind them, Richard Whitmore stood motionless, certain he had won, certain the story was over, certain the lesson had been taught. But outside the mansion gates, fate was already moving, and a black SUV had just turned onto the private driveway, heading straight toward the estate, heading straight toward the biggest mistake Richard Whitmore had ever made. The night air felt colder outside the mansion. Or maybe it only felt that way because everything had changed. Behind them, music still drifted faintly from the ballroom. Crystal chandeliers still glowed through towering windows. 300 guests still stood inside discussing the spectacle they had just witnessed. But for Ethan and Naomi, that world already felt distant, like something viewed through glass, like a life belonging to someone else. The massive front doors closed behind them with a heavy thud. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was exhausted. The kind of silence that comes after surviving something painful, something final. A light breeze moved through rows of perfectly manicured hedges. Palm trees swayed gently above the circular driveway. Somewhere beyond the estate walls, Los Angeles continued as normal. Traffic moved. Restaurants stayed open. People laughed. People argued. People fell in love. The world remained unchanged. Yet for Ethan Whitmore, everything had shifted. He walked slowly beside Naomi toward the front gates. Each step carried him farther away from the life he had always known. No trust fund, no executive position, no family support, no safety net. Just uncertainty. Strangely, he didn't feel fear. Not yet. Mostly, he felt relief. The relief surprised him. Naomi finally stopped walking. The driveway lights cast soft golden shadows across her face. Tears still lingered in her eyes. "Ethan." He turned. She looked heartbroken. Not for herself, for him. That was exactly who she was. "You should go back." He blinked. "What?" "You should go back." Naomi's voice trembled slightly. He didn't mean it. Yes, he did. He was angry. He was prepared. The answer landed heavily between them, because both knew it was true. Richard had planned every detail. The speeches, the humiliation, the ultimatum. Nothing had been spontaneous. Naomi looked away, toward the mansion, toward the glowing windows, toward the life Ethan had just lost. "You shouldn't have to give up everything." A sad smile crossed Ethan's face. "I didn't." "You did." "No." He gently took her hands. His eyes held hers. "I gave up money." A pause. "That's not everything." The tears she had been fighting finally escaped. One slid down her cheek, then another. "Ethan." "I mean it." His voice softened. "For the first time in my life, I actually know who I am." The words hung in the night air. Honest. Simple. True. "I spent years becoming the person my father wanted." He laughed quietly, and somehow I still disappointed him. Naomi tried to smile, failed. Ethan continued. Then I met you. The wind stirred around them. You know what changed? What? Everything that mattered. A tearful laugh escaped her. You're impossible. Probably. You just lost billions of dollars. I know. You don't seem upset. I'm upset about one thing. She looked at him. What? My fiancé keeps trying to break up with me. That finally made her laugh. A real laugh. Brief, but real. For a moment, the pain eased. Only a little. But enough. They stood together beneath the California night. Two people who had just watched an empire choose pride over love. Neither knew what came next. Neither knew how difficult the future might become. But neither regretted the choice. That mattered. A lot. Then Naomi noticed something. Headlights. Approaching slowly from beyond the estate gates. She frowned. The vehicle looked familiar. A black SUV, large, elegant, expensive. The security guard near the entrance immediately straightened, then pressed a button. The iron gates began opening. Ethan glanced over. Another guest? I don't think so. The SUV rolled through the gates without hesitation. No delay, no questions, as though permission had already been granted. The vehicle moved along the curved driveway and came to a smooth stop near the mansion entrance. The engine shut off. Silence followed. Naomi stared. Something about the vehicle triggered a memory. Rain. Hospital lights. A waiting room. An older man. Before she could place it, the driver's door opened. A suited man stepped out. Not security. Not a chauffeur. Something else. Professional. Precise. He moved toward the rear passenger door, then opened it. Slowly. Respectfully. Ethan noticed the change in the atmosphere immediately. Even the estate staff seemed different. Attentive. Alert. Almost nervous. The man who emerged looked familiar. Very familiar. Silver hair. Straight posture. Dark tailored suit. Calm presence. A face Naomi had not expected to see again. Her eyes widened. No way. Ethan looked at her. What? Naomi stared at the figure. The memory finally clicked into place. The bus stop. The storm. The hospital. The sandwich. The coat. The stranger. The man she had helped months ago. The older gentleman adjusted his jacket, then looked directly toward her. Recognition appeared instantly. A warm smile followed. And suddenly, Naomi realized something. This wasn't a coincidence. Not even close. The older man began walking toward them. His pace unhurried. Confident. Steady. Like someone completely comfortable wherever he went. The closer he came, the stranger the situation became, because people were reacting. Valets straightened. Staff members whispered. Security guards watched carefully. Even through the mansion windows, guests seemed to notice movement outside. The atmosphere shifted, like a ripple spreading through water. Ethan lowered his voice. You know him? A little. A little? Naomi laughed nervously. I helped him once. Helped him? She nodded. At a bus stop. Ethan stared. What kind of bus stop leads to this? That's what I'd like to know. The older man finally reached them. His smile widened. Naomi. The sound of her name felt genuine. Warm. Familiar. Not the way people spoke when they wanted something. The way people spoke when they were genuinely happy to see someone. Naomi blinked. Charles? The older man nodded. It's good to see you again. She looked completely confused. "What are you doing here?" Charles Bennett glanced toward the mansion, then toward Ethan, then back at Naomi. A strange expression crossed his face, part amusement, part concern, part disappointment. "As it turns out," he said quietly, "I came because of you." Neither Naomi nor Ethan understood. Not yet. Charles studied both of them. His smile slowly faded. He had noticed the tears, the tension, the emotional wreckage left behind by the evening. He wasn't a foolish man. He immediately understood something had happened, something significant. What did he do? The question sounded calm, but something underneath it felt dangerous. Naomi looked away. Ethan remained silent. Charles noticed both reactions, and suddenly his expression changed completely. The warmth disappeared, not toward Naomi, toward whoever had hurt her. The transformation was subtle, but unmistakable, like watching a friendly grandfather become a powerful executive, like watching kindness step aside for authority. He adjusted his cufflinks, then looked toward the brightly lit mansion. What did Richard Whitmore do? Inside the ballroom, Richard Whitmore was once again surrounded by admirers, or at least people pretending to be admirers. He held a fresh drink, laughed at something an investor said, slowly rebuilding the image he believed had cracked. The worst was over. The problem had been removed. His son had left. Naomi had left. Control had been restored. At least that's what he thought. Then one of his assistants hurried across the ballroom, pale, breathing hard, nervous. Richard frowned. "What is it?" The young man swallowed. "Sir." "What?" The assistant glanced toward the entrance, then back at Richard. His voice dropped. "Charles Bennett just arrived." The smile vanished from Richard's face. Instantly. Completely. The bourbon glass nearly slipped from his fingers. For the first time all evening, genuine fear appeared in his eyes. Because unlike Naomi, Richard knew exactly who Charles Bennett was. And suddenly, for the first time that night, Richard Whitmore realized the story wasn't ending. It was only beginning. The ballroom had gone quiet again. Not the uncomfortable silence that followed an awkward speech. Not the tense silence that came after Richard publicly disowned his son. This was different. This was the silence of powerful people sensing that power itself had just entered the room. Guests began turning toward the entrance. Whispers spread from table to table. Investors exchanged confused glances. Several executives immediately straightened their jackets. Near the bar, one hedge fund manager muttered a single name. Charles Bennett. The reaction traveled through the room like electricity. Because everyone knew who Charles Bennett was. Chairman of Bennett Healthcare Systems. One of the most influential business leaders in America. A billionaire whose hospitals, medical technology companies, and philanthropic foundations reached every corner of the country. A man whose endorsement could transform a corporation. A man whose criticism could destroy one. Richard Whitmore understood that better than anyone. His fingers tightened around his bourbon glass. The assistant beside him looked pale. What is he doing here? Nobody answered. Because nobody knew. Outside, near the front steps, Charles Bennett looked at Naomi carefully. The same young woman who had given away her dinner. The same woman who had sat in a hospital waiting room with a complete stranger. The same woman who never once asked for his name, his wealth, or his influence. And now he could see tears in her eyes. That bothered him, more than he expected. Charles had spent decades evaluating people, politicians, executives, board members, investors. He could usually identify character within minutes. Naomi Brooks had taken less than 5. Good people were rare, and Charles protected good people whenever he found them. "What happened?" he asked again. Ethan exchanged a glance with Naomi. Neither wanted to answer. Neither wanted to revisit what had just happened. Charles noticed immediately. His expression hardened. Richard. The name came out flat. Controlled. Dangerously controlled. Ethan finally spoke. "My father made things difficult." Charles raised an eyebrow. "Difficult?" The older billionaire looked toward the mansion, then back at Ethan. "Difficult is delayed luggage." A pause. "Difficult is bad traffic." Another pause. "Difficult isn't making a woman cry." Naomi almost smiled. The directness caught her off guard. Charles turned toward her. "Naomi." "Yes?" "Would you mind if I walked inside?" The question sounded polite, but there was something underneath it. A quiet certainty, like a judge already familiar with the evidence. Naomi hesitated. "You don't have to." Charles smiled gently. "I know." Then his expression changed. The warmth disappeared. Only professionalism remained. "That's exactly why I'm going." The three of them started toward the mansion. Inside the ballroom, Richard's discomfort was becoming impossible to hide. Guests noticed. They always noticed weakness, especially in powerful people, especially in men who built careers pretending weakness didn't exist. The massive doors opened. Every conversation stopped. Charles Bennett entered. The room immediately shifted, not because he demanded attention, because he naturally commanded it. Some people walked into rooms, others changed rooms simply by entering them. Charles belonged to the second category. His dark suit fit perfectly. His silver hair reflected the chandelier light. His posture remained calm, confident, unhurried. He didn't look angry. That somehow made everything worse. Richard forced a smile. A terrible smile. A nervous smile. The kind nobody had ever seen from him before. Charles. The older billionaire crossed the ballroom. Guests instinctively moved aside, creating a path, creating space, creating distance. Nobody wanted to stand between those two men. Charles stopped directly in front of Richard. The room held its breath. Neither spoke for a moment. Then Richard extended his hand. Wonderful surprise. Charles looked at the hand, then looked at Richard, and never took it. The extended hand remained hanging awkwardly in midair. Several guests visibly cringed. Richard slowly lowered it. The humiliation was subtle, but devastating. Charles finally spoke. "I met Naomi Brooks several months ago." The statement immediately grabbed the room's attention. Richard blinked. For the first time all evening, genuine confusion appeared on his face. "What?" Charles continued. "Rainy night. Bus stop. Hospital." The billionaire's eyes never left Richard. "She helped me when nobody else stopped." Silence. Guests looked toward Naomi, toward Ethan, toward Charles, trying to understand, trying to connect pieces. Charles took another step forward. "I later had my team look into her." A murmur spread through the crowd. Richard felt something unpleasant settle into his stomach. Charles continued calmly. "I discovered a woman who spends her evenings feeding hungry families, a woman who donates more time than most wealthy people donate money, a woman who quietly helps strangers without expecting recognition." The room listened. Every word landed harder than the last, because everyone remembered Richard's speech. Everyone remembered the insults. Everyone remembered the assumptions. And now another billionaire was describing a completely different person. The contrast was brutal. Charles turned slightly toward the crowd. "I've met presidents, governors, CEOs." He paused. "Most of them aren't half the person Naomi Brooks is." The silence deepened. Richard's face began losing color. Charles wasn't finished. Not remotely. He looked directly at Naomi and smiled. The same warm smile from the hospital. "You never asked who I was." Naomi shrugged. "You were having a bad night." A few guests laughed softly, not mockingly, genuinely. Charles nodded. "Exactly." Then he turned back toward Richard. The smile vanished. Instantly. "You know what interests me, Richard?" Richard swallowed. "What?" "The difference between character and status." Nobody moved. Nobody even seemed to breathe. Charles continued. "You spent this evening judging a woman's value." His voice remained calm, steady, controlled. "Based on where she grew up. Based on how much money she has. Based on what she could do for your image." Every sentence felt like another stone being placed on Richard's shoulders. The billionaire tried to interrupt. "Charles, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." "No." The word cut through the ballroom, sharp, final. "There hasn't." Charles took one deliberate step closer. Close enough that only a few feet separated them. Close enough that Richard could no longer avoid eye contact. "You publicly humiliated one of the finest people I've ever met." The statement echoed, not loudly, powerfully. A reporter near the back discreetly activated his phone recorder. Others did the same. Nobody wanted to miss what happened next. Charles glanced briefly toward Ethan, then toward Naomi. The younger couple stood together, still holding hands, still united, despite everything. That seemed to affect him, more than he expected. When he spoke again, his voice softened. "Most people reveal themselves when they gain power." His eyes returned to Richard. Naomi revealed herself when she had none. The room went completely still, because everyone understood exactly what he meant. And everyone understood who had won that comparison. Richard looked trapped, for perhaps the first time in his professional life. Trapped. His usual confidence had vanished. His usual control had vanished. Even his usual supporters had quietly stepped away. Nobody wanted to be associated with what was happening. Charles adjusted his cufflink, then delivered the sentence that changed everything. "I didn't come here because I'm interested in your gala." Richard's stomach tightened. Charles continued. "I came because I'm interested in Naomi Brooks." A wave of confusion moved through the crowd. Richard frowned. "What does that mean?" Charles smiled. A small smile. A knowing smile. The kind of smile that appears immediately before a revelation. "It means," he said calmly, "that the woman you just called unworthy is about to become the most important person in this room." The silence that followed felt endless. Richard stared. The guests stared. Even Naomi stared. Because nobody yet understood what Charles Bennett was about to reveal. And whatever it was big enough to make one of America's most powerful billionaires smile while Richard Whitmore looked terrified. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 300 guests stood frozen beneath crystal chandeliers while Charles Bennett calmly adjusted the cuff of his suit. The silence itself had become a spectacle. Richard Whitmore swallowed. "What are you talking about?" Charles looked toward Naomi, then toward Ethan, then back at Richard. His expression remained composed, almost gentle. which somehow made the moment even more intimidating. 3 months ago, Charles said, I asked a question. The room listened. I asked my executive team what kind of person should lead the largest community outreach initiative in our company's history. A murmur spread through the ballroom. Several people recognized exactly what he meant. The Bennett Foundation Project. A massive national effort. Hundreds of millions of dollars dedicated to food insecurity, family assistance, housing support, and community development. News outlets had discussed it for months. Political leaders wanted involvement. Major nonprofits competed for partnerships. Everyone knew the project. Nobody knew who would lead it. Until now. Charles continued. I wasn't looking for impressive resumes. His eyes briefly met Richard's. I wasn't looking for powerful connections. Another pause. I wasn't looking for people who knew the right people. The meaning became increasingly obvious. Richard's face continued losing color. I was looking for character. Charles turned toward Naomi. A warm smile appeared. The first genuine smile anyone had seen all evening. Then I met Naomi Brooks. The room became completely silent. No whispers, no movement, no clinking glasses, nothing. Just attention. Charles walked slowly toward her. Every eye followed. Most people spend their lives talking about compassion. His voice carried clearly through the ballroom. Naomi lives it. He gestured toward her. This woman fed families long before anyone noticed. She stayed late when everyone else went home. She helped people who couldn't repay her. She gave away what little she had. Naomi felt her throat tighten. The attention made her uncomfortable. Always had. She never helped people to be seen. She helped because somebody needed help. That was all. Charles continued. The night we met, she gave a complete stranger her dinner. Several guests glanced toward Naomi, then toward Richard, then back again. The contrast had become impossible to ignore. She gave away her coat. She stayed at a hospital for hours. She never asked who I was. His voice softened. Not once. The ballroom remained silent, because everyone understood exactly how unusual that was, especially in rooms like this. Rooms built around status, around influence, around advantage. Charles stepped beside Naomi, then addressed the crowd. So I made a decision. Richard's stomach dropped. He already knew. Not the details, but the outcome, the direction, the shift. Power was moving, and everyone in the room could feel it. Charles smiled. Effective immediately, Naomi Brooks will become Executive Director of the Bennett Community Impact Foundation. A collective gasp swept across the ballroom. The announcement landed like thunder. Several reporters immediately grabbed their phones. Investors exchanged stunned looks. Politicians whispered to each other. The foundation position wasn't symbolic. It carried enormous authority, national visibility, resources, influence, and most importantly, the ability to help millions of people. Naomi stared at Charles, certain she had misheard him. What? Charles laughed softly. The reaction seemed to delight him. That's exactly why you're perfect for it. The room erupted into whispers. Richard remained frozen, completely frozen. Charles continued. The foundation will launch with an initial commitment of $200 million. Another wave of shock. Naomi looked ready to faint. Ethan. Her voice barely emerged. Ethan squeezed her hand. His eyes shined with pride. Not surprise. Pride. Because deep down he wasn't shocked at all. Naomi deserved this. Everyone who truly knew her understood that. Charles continued. The board unanimously approved the decision yesterday. He smiled. You just didn't know it yet. A nervous laugh escaped Naomi. This can't be real. It is. Charles handed her a folder. Simple. Black. Professional. Nothing dramatic. The weight of it felt enormous. Inside were official documents, contracts, plans, foundation proposals. Everything real. Everything legitimate. Everything waiting. The crowd watched her open it. Watched her realize the truth. Watched a woman who had spent years helping strangers suddenly discover she now had the power to help thousands more. And still, Naomi's first reaction wasn't excitement. It was concern. She looked at Charles. Why me? The question seemed genuine. Charles nodded. Exactly the response he expected. Because someone else would have asked about salary, or prestige, or influence. Naomi asked why. Charles smiled. Because when nobody was watching, his voice softened. You still chose kindness. The room fell silent again. A different silence this time. Not tension. Reflection. The kind that arrives when truth becomes impossible to ignore. Across the ballroom, several guests lowered their eyes. Because they remembered. They remembered standing there. Watching Richard humiliate her. Watching Naomi remain dignified. Watching Ethan choose love. Watching themselves do nothing. The realization wasn't comfortable, nor should it have been. Richard finally found his voice. Charles. The older billionaire turned. Richard attempted a smile. A desperate one. We can discuss future collaborations. Nobody missed the change. Hours earlier, Richard had dismissed Naomi. Now he was trying to negotiate. The shift felt pathetic. Everyone saw it. Charles certainly did. The older billionaire's expression remained polite, but only barely. I don't think so. The answer landed heavily. Richard's face tightened. Charles continued. My foundation partners with organizations that reflect our values. A pause. And after tonight, I have serious concerns about yours. The room practically vibrated with tension. Several executives quietly stepped farther away from Richard. Nobody wanted to be standing too close when the fallout arrived. Charles wasn't finished. Not quite. He turned toward Ethan. I heard what happened. Ethan nodded. Charles extended his hand. Slowly. Deliberately. The younger man accepted it. The handshake lasted only a moment. But everyone understood its significance. Respect. Recognition. Approval. Charles smiled. You chose well. Ethan glanced toward Naomi. Yeah. His voice carried emotion. Yeah, I did. For the first time all evening, the ballroom erupted into applause. Not everyone. Not immediately. A few people started. Then more joined. Then dozens. Then nearly the entire room. The sound grew louder, warmer, stronger. Naomi stood stunned. The same room that had watched her humiliation now watched her triumph. Not because she had become rich, not because she had gained status, because the truth had finally become visible. The applause wasn't for money. It was for character. Richard stood alone. Nobody applauded him. Nobody approached him. Nobody defended him. For perhaps the first time in his life, he looked exactly what he was, a wealthy man standing in a room full of people who suddenly saw him clearly. Charles stepped beside Naomi. You ready? She laughed nervously. For what? The rest of your life. That finally made her smile. A real smile. Bright. Unforced. The kind that had first captured Ethan's attention inside a community kitchen. The kind that had changed everything. 1 year later, Naomi stood beneath warm yellow lights inside a newly expanded community center in South Chicago. Children laughed nearby. Families filled the dining hall. Volunteers carried trays of food. The building buzzed with life. The Bennett Foundation had helped create centers like this across the country. Dozens of them. Thousands of families served. Countless lives improved. And yet Naomi still spent her Thursday evenings doing exactly what she had always done. Handing out meals, listening to people, helping. A little girl approached the serving table. Naomi handed her a hot meal. The child smiled. "Thank you." Naomi smiled back. "You're welcome." Across the room, Ethan watched. The same way he had years ago. The same admiration. The same love. Nothing important had changed. Outside, evening settled gently over the neighborhood. Streetlights flickered on. Cars rolled past. Life continued. Beautiful. Messy. Ordinary. And extraordinary. Because sometimes the greatest twists don't happen when someone becomes rich. Sometimes they happen when the world finally notices the value that was already there. Naomi Brooks had never needed a billionaire to make her worthy. She had always been worthy. Charles Bennett simply made sure everyone else could finally see it. And in the end, the thing that changed her life wasn't power. It wasn't money. It wasn't status. It was the same thing that had guided her from the beginning. Kindness. The kind given freely. The kind offered without expectation. The kind that eventually finds its way back home. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment below and share what part stayed with you the most. And here's something I'd really love to know. If you believe kindness always comes back around, type a simple one in the comments. If you think Ethan made the right choice by choosing love over money, type a 2. And if you've ever helped someone without expecting anything in return, type a 3. I read your comments, and I'd love to hear your story. Also, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next story might be even more powerful than this one. Here on this channel, we share stories about kindness, justice, second chances, and the moments that remind us what truly matters in life. Until next time, take care of yourself, take care of the people around you, and remember this. Your value is never determined by your bank account, your background, or what other people think of you. The right people will see your worth long before the world does. See you in the next story.